The most basic kind of suspension line that you will deal with is starting directly from a single column tie somewhere on the body. It can be an ankle, a thigh, the waist, whatever, and use the leftover rope from your single column tie to create a suspension point. There are a few different ways of doing this. If you are using a Somerville bowline, which makes your single column tie very safe and absolutely uncollapsible, you can leave the bite open like this and go directly to your suspension point, and then go back through the wrap itself to create a suspension line. If the wrap is too tight or the pressure that it would create is not okay, then you will have to go back through the bite. Like this. This is only okay and safe if the thing that is loaded is very, very light. Either if it's only a partial suspension, or if it's going to be only an ankle or only a knee, and most of the weight and the load is on something else, because the bite is a very weak point, and every time you move your rope like this, the friction and the weight is damaging your bite a lot, and you might have the rope breaking here if you put too much weight and too much pressure on it. So the only cases where you can use the bite directly as a suspension line is for something very, very light. Otherwise, you will have to go directly through the wrap. If neither of these two options are possible, then there is a solution to reinforce this bite and make it stronger. This technique is called double bite, and I will show you now how to do it. You need your bite to be fairly small, quite short, and then pull just a buckle through it from the tail. Bend the tail into a loop and pull the bite through it. And pull this very tight downwards. Like this. This way, you can go back through this new double bite that you have created, which is a lot safer because, first of all, it's doubled, and it will always be a different part of the rope because the rest will always be a different size and a different placement. And this way you save your bite, everything is safe here, and you're using a reinforced double bite and a fresh part of your rope. Other way that you can attach a suspension line, if not directly from a single column tie or double column tie using the tail of the rope, is to have a harness already tied onto the body and use a whole new rope to create a suspension line. For this, you need to create an anchor point into the tie before you go to the suspension point. The most common type of anchor point into a harness is called Epsilon or Y hanger, and it's the perfect option to grab two different sides, whether it's on the same bend or on a side with two different bends. It basically is exactly like a single column tie with something splitting it in the middle. I will show you now first a normal single column tie on the wrap and then apply it in a Y hanger so it will really make sense for you. If I would do this on a bend without anything splitting it, I would go like this and then all around and again like this. right? And then this would be a single column tie. If I do exactly the same thing for a Y hanger with something in between, wrap, and then go on the other side. And now instead of keeping all the lines like a perfect circle, like this, for a single column tie, I want to bring them all flat, like this. And now you can already see the epsilon. And only now your bite will go around everything and close it with a knot. This way, I created an anchor point into these two wraps. And you can apply exactly the same method on these two, these two, these two, these four, and have a Y hanger. After you have made the Y shape, it's important to understand the difference between using an overhand knot to close it or an uncollapsible system like the Somerville bowline. If you're using an overhand knot to close your epsilon, you have to be aware that this knot can potentially open and collapse. Either collapse onto itself and become tight, or worst case scenario, completely open, which would make your suspension line extremely dangerous. So if you're using an overhand knot, you have to go through the bite with the entire rope before going to your suspension point. This way, even if this single column tie would be to open for whatever reason, there is no way that it would get completely undone. As you can see, it will tighten on the rope itself. And then the worst case scenario would be a messy undone epsilon, but the person cannot fall down. After building your epsilon and deciding whether or not you need to secure the bite, in this case I'm using a Somerville bowline, so I don't need to. If you had an overhand knot, you would need to pull the entire rope through the bite, as I explained before. You go to your suspension point, and then the epsilon can be used with the rope going back through this way. And then back to your suspension point. Make sure that you're using it on the round part of the epsilon and not through like this. The narrow part of the epsilon will get very tight under pressure and your rope might get stuck if you use it this way. Something else very important about the epsilon is making sure that before you close it, both sides are equal. If by mistake you would close it like this, when we will suspend, only one side will pick up a lot of the load and this one almost none. So you want to make sure that your epsilons are absolutely centered and the tension is balanced before closing your knot. If you have noticed after putting some tension on your epsilon that one side is slightly shorter than the other one and the load is unbalanced, you can choose on purpose to pass the rope back from your suspension point on the side that would be slightly longer. And this way you can correct an imbalance and make the load equal again on the harness. you have to make sure that it is wide enough to come back from the suspension line with your rope and go through it back to the suspension point. But if it is too wide, for example, like this, even if you have made both sides very balanced, the slightest movement of the body out of a perfectly flat angle in relation to the floor will make one side way more loaded than the other one. This length in an epsilon makes it very unstable. If I pull now to the side, you can see that one side gets completely unloaded, and same thing on the other side. The smaller the epsilon, the less problems you will have regarding this. If your angle is smaller, it doesn't matter so much. So take this in consideration. Just enough space for the rope to come back through, but not too wide, because it will create a lot of problems with loading later on. If you want to attach the bands from the side, you can use the same method of the epsilon. It looks a little bit different while doing it, so I will show it to you here clearly. You want to grab the first wrap and then the second wrap and bring the tail over and then the bite over. And then it's the same as usual. The bite goes over and under everything. Make sure that your epsilon is balanced and then close it with a knot. In the case of some of your lines being a little bit unstable, for example here this top line tends to fall downwards, you can help gain stability in your suspension line by closing your epsilon onto itself, collapsing it. At this point, before making your knot, you can pull on these two ends and then pull on the tail and on the bite and bring everything tight together. This way, this wrap is directly connected to the epsilon and to the previous wrap. And your suspension line becomes like a straight line pulling equally on both wraps. This can really help saving some stability in your tie. The main difference after doing this, after collapsing an epsilon, which you can do here on a side suspension or here like I've shown before, is that you don't have space anymore to come back through. So you will have to use the bite. As I've explained before, it's really unsafe to do this if there is going to be a heavy load. You will have to use the double bite method, pulling through from the tail for your double bite and then securing it with a loop on the tail. Pull the bite through and pull this one tight. Now that we have seen a few ways to anchor the suspension line onto the harness, I'm going to show you how to lock this line after going back through a suspension point from down to up, when you don't have enough ropes to go from the harness to the point, through the harness, and back to the point. If you're doing a partial suspension or something very low, you will have enough to go from the harness to the point, back to the harness, and maybe that's it. So this is what I'm showing you now. You can do any anchor point that you like. I will use now an Epsilon with an overhand knot and a secured bight. Going to my suspension point. Make sure that your rope is straight and that there are no twists. Then back through my Epsilon. And let's imagine that I don't have enough rope to go back to my suspension point. The first option is to make a half hitch. Open the rope, go through, and pull it tight. One half hitch alone is not a lock. It can always move up and down. So after building a first half hitch, you need to make a second one. Before pulling this one down close to the first one, you have to hold the first one in place with one hand and then pull this one down and pull it tight. You can add an extra bit of tightness by holding both of them together and pulling this rope out like this. This method of locking the line will be enough to take some pressure downwards like this, but anything that would touch this line and push it down will make everything collapse. For this reason, I do not like to use half hitches from down to up. There are a few ways to secure this, but it can be a bit complicated and it's never completely certain. So from down to up, I prefer to use a quick release, which work in the same way, but it's built directly down, so it cannot go lower. So you want to make it exactly the same, but this time, instead of pulling the entire rope through your half hitch, you're going to pull only a quick release. To make it safe, because now if I pull on the tail, everything will open, we're going to use this system of creating a loop, pulling the bight through, and pulling it tight. You have to make sure when you're doing this kind of lock that it's the lowest that it can be. If you build this slightly higher, it will go down. And this is actually a very safe way to lock a line from down to up. You can then do whatever you want with your leftover ropes. I will show later ways to get rid of the extra rope on the suspension line. Even with tons of weight applied to this line, this can never get tighter. And all you have to do to open it is open this loop and then pull on the tail. You have to pay extra attention when you're locking a line from down to up. If you have done half hitches, and either you've built them too low or they did slide and end up all the way down, this can get so tight that you can never open it again. And you will have to cut the suspension line, which is a very, very dangerous thing to do if you don't have somebody to help you carry the model. So make sure that none of your lines built from down to up ever collapses all the way down on a half hitch. Yeah. Another way to do this is to bring it as high as you need and then start wrapping directly around the line. Make sure that you start this wrapping really all the way down so it cannot slide down. And then wrap a few times, split your suspension line open, go through it, pull everything down, and then go back through the Epsilon and lock this line onto it. Now I have a very, very short amount of rope left, so I will pull the whole knots through it, but you can do the same thing with a quick release. This is a method that is used mostly by NACA and students of NACA. This system of wrapping directly onto the suspension line that I just showed you before works very well. It's very safe, very stable. One thing that I don't really like about it is having to pull the whole rope through the suspension line. Because of course it makes it very safe. This cannot go anywhere. But later on, if there's a lot of weight on this and you need to untie this line, it can be really hard to open these lines again to have your rope going through. It can be really painful on your fingers, very damaging on the rope, and a little bit unsafe if you need to open this line while holding this very tight. So something that I like to do with this is split the lines and then only pull a loop through it, like this, and then make a full knot or the quick release security that I've showed you before onto this loop. Like this. So it doesn't matter how much pressure there is on this. When it's time to untie, this is always easy to open. And even with a lot of pressure, you can always pop this open. When using this spiral system, a very useful trick to keep in mind is that to untie it, you can push it up like this. And on the way down, you can keep one or two to create some friction and help you lower the body in a safe way. Now, for example, that there's barely any weight on this line because it's only my knees, you can see that it's not even going down. So if you had a lot of pressure, this could help you lower the body in a very smooth and safe way, rather than holding all the weight in your hands like this. In order to reduce friction, to save your rope, or just to make it easier for you to lift a very heavy loaded suspension line, we're sometimes going to use carabiners. You can either put it directly through the bite, like so, or through the Epsilon itself. As you can see, it makes the rope slide a lot easier than directly rope on rope. When locking a line that was attached to a carabiner from down to up, it is very important to make it very safe. The carabiner helps you reduce friction, so it helps you to pull the body up, but it also means that it will go down a lot faster and a lot easier. In this case, doing the slip knot half hitch that I was showing you before from down to up is very easy right now because I'm not putting actual pressure on the line. But if I had a lot of weight in this, it would be really hard for me to build this with my fingers in the way. One way to make it easier for you is to go, after pulling up, go around both ropes and back through the carabiner. From this point on, even with a lot of pressure, this rope is very easy to hold. As you can see now, I can hold it with 2 fingers. And then doing your quick release half hitch will be very easy. Or you could even now, in this case, that this is secured, do your half hitches in a very easy way. Usually, when attaching a suspension line from the body onto the suspension point, you will have enough rope, especially if the model is standing, to go from the harness to the suspension point, back onto the harness, and back to the suspension point. Anytime that this is possible, do it. The more amount of wraps between the harness and the ring, the more safe your suspension line is going to be. Obviously because there are going to be more lines, so it's stronger, but also because the amount of friction and pulley will be greater. So if you can, always go back to the ring or to the bamboo with 2 ropes. Once you are onto your ring, you have a few different options to lock it. You can start building half hitches directly. You can go back down again and again and again, and then do only a few half hitches. But whatever you're going to do next, I highly recommend that first you make what I call a U-lock to secure your line and make it lighter on your hands. Now I'm not really lifting my legs, but if I had actual weight on this suspension line, building half hitches would be really difficult because I need to hold the weight and then do this motion. And very often what happens is this, the line starts going down again. So in order to prevent this, you can bring it up and then immediately go all around the lines and then back up onto the ring. Once you've done this, as you can see, I can hold the weight of my legs with only 2 fingers. So this is a lot more easy now for me to build whatever next I want to build on the suspension line. The most common way of closing a suspension line from up to down will be to use half hitches. For this, the easier way is to always work on your side. So avoid building your half hitches with the rope in the back and then doing things like this because you're working against yourself. So make sure that everything is on your side, your tail, your rope, everything. If the rope is on the right side of the suspension line, I will build my half hitches on the right side of the suspension line. The easy way to build it will be to switch hands, hold it now with your left hand, and with your right hand, go over the rope with your fingers. You can use 2, 3, 4, as many as is comfortable for you. Go behind the line that you want to half hitch yourself onto. To keep, and the back of my hand now is keeping this loop open. And then give the rope with the left hand. You can keep this loop open now with this other hand. And then pull the whole rope through. Bring it wherever you need it and pull it tight down. There has to be tension on this line for the half hitch to be frictioned. Again, 1 half hitch alone doesn't hold anything. If I let go, it opens and it will slide up. Pull it down and build a second half hitch. I will do the second one a little faster so you see how to tie it in motion. And pull them tight together. As you probably notice right now, because I was not holding this rope and guiding it, it got stuck on the bottom of the half hitch and dragged a lot, and it made it a little bit difficult for me to friction it. A better way to make a half hitch will be to go through, and instead of using this hand to keep this loop open, you use it to hold your rope like a stick. And make sure that it doesn't fall down into this crease. Hold it like a stick, keep it up where there is space, and you can pull your whole rope through very easily. You can repeat this as many times as you want until you feel like it is completely automatic. Make sure that whatever you've done on the suspension line, the last thing that you do is 2 half hitches on top of each other, pulled tight. And then if you let go of the rope, this is safe. This U-lock here will help you while you build your frictions on the suspension line, but it can also help you while lowering the body down in the same way than the twist on the bottom. If you keep it and just slightly open it, you can control the weight very easily. If I didn't have this on the way down, it would just go down. When suspending on a bamboo, it's very important that all your main lines, everything that is loaded, is inside the ropes that are holding the bamboo itself. If you suspend something heavy on the outside of the bamboo, everything will just tilt like this, and you can have your model really falling out because the whole line will jump out of the bamboo. The only time you can suspend something on the outside is either to finish up your rope from the main line, if you want to just use this to get rid of the extra rope in an easy and aesthetical way, this is completely fine. Or if it's a line that is very lightly loaded, like if it's a hairline or just one ankle that is part of a whole position. In any other case, you can never ever tie here on the outside of the bamboo. If you're suspending on a bamboo instead of a ring, there's a different lock to do in the beginning. But then after that, everything is the same. The main difference is right on top here. After going back and forth between the harness and the bamboo at least twice, you want to go all the way around these lines to close them together and then go through once and pull it tight. This way you can close the lines here before doing half hitches or any of the options that I've shown you before. If you start tying a half hitch directly on this, I don't know how much you can see, but there is a lot of space here in between the lines, and the bamboo is splitting the line open. And what makes a half hitch work is the tightness. So the bamboo is working against your half hitch now. So first you have to lock it by going all around. I'm showing you a second time, and then through. Pull it tight. And if you're suspending something really heavy, if it's a really heavy part of the body, you can go one more time through. And then do any of the locks that you're comfortable with. This method of locking on a bamboo allows you to move the line sideways if you want to. Either by pulling all the lines closer together, or if you need to pick up your model and move something slightly, you can do this. It can be an advantage if you want to move the lines, but it can also be a problem sometimes. For example, you're trying to tie an ankle and you want it exactly here, and because of the position of the model, it keeps sliding to the side. If you want your line to be stable on the bamboo, we're going to kind of copy the U-lock that I was showing you on the ring, but on the bamboo this time. So you go all around, all the way up, and then one more time over the bamboo, and then pull all of this really tight. And you can repeat this a few times without leaving any space between your lock and the bamboo itself. And this way, this line cannot move and go anywhere because the rope has friction on the bamboo. And then you can again lock this any way that you like. After locking your line in a safe way, you might be left with a lot of ropes left over. And there are different ways to deal with this, either in an efficient way or in an aesthetical way. And I'm going to show you now a few different options from the top and a few different options from the bottom. So after loading your line and locking it with the U safety lock, I've shown you before how to do half hitches directly on the line. Another way to close this line in a fast way, both to lock it and to open it, would be to tie a quick release directly after the U-lock. You have to make sure that this is really all the way up so it cannot move up or down. Of course, you can't leave it just like this because this rope can open the quick release. So as usual, you want to create this loop and pull the quick release through it and pull it tight. After doing this, you can do whatever you want with your leftover rope without worrying that the model would drop or just lose some height. Some of my favorite things to do when I have so much ropes left over is to simply try and go back from the harness to the ring as many times as I can until I have very little rope left over. For example, in this case, I could go a couple of times until I have only this amount of rope. And then this is very easy to deal with in an aesthetical way. You can either tie a couple of half hitches here, and you don't have to worry about how tight they are because the safety locks are done from the very beginning. So you could simply do this and then poke your knots through, and the lines are aesthetically pleasing and safe. Or another way to finish this, which I like very much because I find it more beautiful than half hitches, which are horizontal lines on a vertical line, so I don't really like how it breaks the visual of it, is to use the Naka bow, which goes this way. So you go all around the suspension line and then open and go through and pull. One more time, a little bit faster. You go through, all around, open it, and pull it up. This is a very easy way to close your line. It's very fast, but you have to be very, very careful. This is very unstable. It can really go down super easily. So you should never use this finishing if you don't have a very, very secure and safe lock on top of your line from the very beginning. You can do the same thing from up to down. Again, rolling all around the rope, opening it and pulling through. If you have so much ropes left over, you can do the same thing, but instead of trying to tie it down here, which leaves me with still a bit too much rope for it to be beautiful, you can do it a lot higher, and this time try to pull all of it until the knots, like this. Make sure that there's always tension in all the lines, and then repeat the same thing with this leftover loop. Go all around and through. And this way, even with a lot of leftover rope, you can have a very clean and very neat suspension line and very easy to untie. You just push it up to break the tension, and same thing here, push it up to break the tension. Other options to finish your rope in a very fast way could be, after doing your first quick release here, pulling all the rope to the knots, and then get rid of this big buckle. Again, you could do this Naka bow with all the loop, for example. Or do a big half hitch with all of this rope. This is not aesthetically very pleasing, but it's very fast to tie and very fast to untie. So if you know you have to deal with something a little bit stressful, you can very, very easily open this and open this and have it ready to go down. Another similar way to deal with it, after doing your U-lock and the quick release, instead of locking this quick release, you can pass the entire rope through it and now pulling it tight on itself. Pull the suspension line through until the loop and the knots are pretty much at the same height. And then again, simply make a half hitch with all of this. And this is also a very quick line to untie. Now that I've explained to you some of the most basic options to deal with suspension lines, I want to just tie a few lines without explaining anything, just so you see how I intuitively deal with it using all these different options and techniques and with a little bit more of flow. So this is more of a demo than an explanation. this is the first time that you are learning anything about suspension lines and you haven't been to a real class and learned from an instructor, a qualified instructor, I really recommend that you practice this with a heavy object or on yourself before doing this with anybody else. You need to become really comfortable with weight and with moving the lines from down to up, from up to down, letting them go, and find really flow and become fast to lock, unlock, bring up and bring down. When you will be managing someone's weight, it's going to be a lot heavier and a lot more stressful, and they might need you to do something very quickly. You don't want to hesitate with a suspension line. If you are using suspension lines on a person, it means you have to be super comfortable with it and able to do it with your eyes closed. All of these movements have to become pure muscle memory before you use it on a person. So the very first thing to remember is never to try to pick up weight like this, with just one rope going from the body to your hand without going back at least one time. When you're doing this, this is really sheer force. This is 100% of the weight is against you. So this can be very, very heavy, and it can be quite dangerous too, because you'll always lose a bit of height. So the most important thing to remember is, if you can, which usually you can, always go back at least one time through the harness and then lift. And this way there is some amount of pulley already happening that helps you. And as soon as you can also go back to your suspension point, do it. And now you can see that I can hold this entire weight with only 2 fingers. And the more I do this, the more friction I create, the easier it gets to hold this. Now I think I could almost let it go, and it almost holds by itself. So you can see how this is working. And as I'm removing loops, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So really remember this. Every time you can add a passage, add a passage. When you can't go immediately to your ring or to the harness and you have a lot of weight to hold like this, one thing that will make it way easier for you is to hold everything together, so you create friction by squeezing the ropes against each other. And then I can go to my ring working with one hand without any weight on this rope, so it makes it a lot easier. And once I'm back around my ring, then I can let go of this and keep pulling. If you do this while moving a lot of weight, you will make it a lot easier for you, a lot less damaging on your rope, and a lot more smooth for your partner. The same thing goes for down. If you can reach the point, but then you cannot go back to the harness, again, either change your rope or make your partner kneel up or change the height. If it's a body part that you can handle the weight for a little bit, then pick it up, bring it high enough that you can now reach the harness, and then don't try to handle all of this with sheer force. Now I'm only dealing with a very light weight, and this is already very difficult, and the chances that I'll drop it are already really high. So if this is an actual person, bring it up as much as you can and then immediately pinch to create this friction. And now you can see that I can actually handle this weight very easily and then go back through the bite or the Epsilon or whatever it is with one hand. Pull it up, and then you can continue lifting the way you want to, or lock your line. On the way down from something like this, remember that there is only one passage, which means very little friction. This is going to be very heavy very quickly. It's crucial that you hold these lines and create the friction before you start untying the lock. And when you're pulling this quick release out, don't pull it towards yourself, pull it upwards. So once the quick release is off, you actually have strength and friction. So like this, and then you can let it down. As you go down with this, you might have the problem again that these knots get stuck in the bite. And if there's a lot of weight on this, you might not be able to fix it. So make sure that before you reach your epsilon or your bite, you pinch again, get the knots out, and then bring the weight down. For the same reason that I recommend that you never use only one rope like this to pull the weight up, because it's very heavy for you, you should never really load a line on a single rope like this, because even if you can somehow with the U-lock make it hold, this is a very unstable line. You can see that as soon as I let go, it's sliding, and even your half hitches will have a hard time holding this in place. So you should never have a lot of weight in a single rope like this. Again, unless it's only hair or a secondary line, you shouldn't do it. Also because on the untying, as soon as you're removing all of this, this is your pure strength holding the model. When you're trying to pick up a lot of weight from down to up, you can really just go as many times as you want. And every time you want to go back closer to your line, always hold it with your other hand to create friction and keep the line steady. If you're only doing these kind of things, now this is quite light, so I'm not having any problem. But if I was suspending a person's weight, I would every time lose a bit of height. So anytime you're not pulling up, you always hold it like this, and then it's safer and easier for you. Same thing from up to down, except this time you can do something that's very helpful for you. Wrap your hand once around it, and this way you're not only pulling, there's also just some kind of a push on the rope, and it makes it easier for you. So you can push like this, and every time you're far away, block again, and then wrap closer to the ring. So you have more distance for you to work with. When you're lowering the weight, don't have the loop on your hand, because when you get to the ring, you'll have to undo this loop, and if it's a very, very heavy weight, you might really shock it. So this is good to pull up, but on the way down, just hold your rope like this. And if you're afraid that there's too much weight on one hand, then use again this system of creating friction on the ropes themselves with your hand, and then you can distribute the effort between this hand and this rope, and this hand and the entire bundle of rope. And then you can just let go a little bit and squeeze again as much as you want. Technically, you can only use this to bring weight down. And every time I squeeze, it stops it. Every time I open, it goes down. You can play around with this with an object, so you get familiar with it before you do it on a person. But this is really what gives you strength, not this. Don't rely on your own strength when you're moving suspension lines. In the same way, it's very important that every time you are undoing a lock, for example, if I had half hitches here, and this is very heavily loaded, you don't want to be only doing this, because you might be surprised by the actual weight. So one hand always holds the line when you're untying it, while the other hand is working. Find the way to be efficient with one hand. So now I'm always safe with this, even if I'm letting go of the rope itself here. And then you can bring it down. Same thing if you realize, okay, now I want to do something else. First, you do your lock, and then you can work on your line. Always make sure to create friction, either with your hand or with the rope itself, and never have full weight on your hand. If you're trying to lift something really heavy and even doing this is not enough for you, there are a few tricks that you can use. The first thing is try to use the angle. The more you're closing the angle up here, the more friction you create, and the harder it will be for you to lift something. So the heavier it is, the more you want to open this angle to reduce the friction and move back instead of straight down like this. The opposite goes when you're trying to lower something. The more you open, the faster it will go down. And if you want to make it safer to bring it down, you can actually close the angle like this, and it will be a bit easier for you. Another thing you can do is find the rope that is directly connected to the one in your hand, so this one. And as I'm pulling down with my right hand, I'm pulling up with my left hand. And this is something you can do to help picking up a lot of weight. Of course, another way would be to simply support it from down to up.